Welcome to everyone. And so let's get going. I'm going to say that today's agenda is going to be a little bit about me. Then we'll have the resume presentation and questions and answers at the end. So a little bit about me. I'm the president and CEO of Building Toward the Future student program. I started it about 16 years ago in actuality, and have been running it since then. I have 26 years of human resources experience in various HR industries. And my higher education experience, I have taught at Bryant and Stratton College when I was in Ohio, Kent State University. And then when I was in Baton Rouge, I taught at Baton Rouge Community College, basically teaching students the same thing that, I'm teaching you today. So that's about that. So this is nothing that you have to type in, but I want to ask you a question. Do you know the average amount of time a recruiter reviews a resume? And that's the time that you actually send it in to him or her, and it's on their desk and they're reviewing it. And the answer to that question is 6 seconds. So you have 6 seconds to go to the no pile or the go pile. And it's all going to depend on how you represent yourself in that resume. Remember, that resume is all about you, who you are. You haven't walked through the door. They don't know what you look like. They don't know the kind of clothes you're wearing, any of that. All you are is on that piece of paper. And one thing I would like to tell you, I just want to make sure that you understand the resumes that I am talking about today are those that are used in the United States. I am not talking about ones that are outside in other countries. If you are planning on applying for a position in a different country, you're going to have to do your homework. Different countries have different formats. They use different kinds of information. For example, if you're applying to something in China, they want to see your photo. They want to know personal information about you. That is not the kind of resume that you use here in the United States. Also, I would like to tell you that I'm mostly talking about very conservative companies about resumes. So the one thing I get in conversations with students about is, well, Ms. Clayton, that's not the kind of resume I need to send in if I'm in, digital marketing. They want to see a lot of colors and pictures and things like that. If that's what you have been told, my suggestion to you is to find a mentor in that field and just check it out with them. Find out with them the best way to apply for those different positions. So I'm talking very conservative in the United States. Okay, so going back to that 6 second rule, what you want to do is make sure that you make your resume glanceable. So you don't want to have the recruiter hunting all over the place for information all over your resume. You want something simple. So these are some resume tips to keep in mind. One of the things I've had to do when I was working at Kent State, I was also working as a career advisor. And a lot of times students would come to me and they would say, well, I need some help with my resume. And then I'd sit down and I'd try to help them, and come to find out I couldn't edit their resume because it was in some kind of weird template. So my thing to students is type your resume freehand. It may take you longer, but as far as editing goes, it's going to be much simpler for you in the future. Or if someone else is trying to help you. You want to keep it professional. So best to use just black ink. Like I said, if you've been told otherwise in your field, then you might want to find a mentor to find out about that information. You want to print it on quality resume paper, and there is something called resume paper that you can find at like your local Office Max, one of those office stores like that. It can be a little expensive. So if you know for a fact that you need to have your resume printed, I would suggest you go to the store and have them print it for you on resume paper. For US resumes, you do not include your photo or personal information, as I stated earlier. One thing I like to tell students is be aware of your cell phone message. Sometimes students like to put in a lot of music or, these really weird callback, sounds and things like that. You're looking for a job. So try not to have that going on when you're actually looking for the job. After you get the job, then go back to whatever you want. But you want to have something that's very, very plain and simple as far as your phone message. My name is Yvette Clayton. I'm not available at this particular time. Please leave your name, number, and message, and I'll return your call as soon as possible. And just go with something very, very simple. Be aware of your email address you're using. You want something that's very simple and plain. When I was looking for a job, I just used my first initial last name at yahoo.com. Or there's 9 other free different email addresses that you can come up with. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that because that's actually on my website that I'll share with you a little bit later on. But you want something that's very, very professional. You don't want something like, hot to trot at, gmail.com, just, something like that. So you want something that's, very, very simple. And your name is always the best way to go. So let's look at resume format. So your resume should be free of spelling and grammatical errors. That is most important thing I can tell you. Even one error can make a difference. I remember a long time ago, I was working at a company. There was a hiring manager looking for an administrative assistant position. This person had one grammatical error, not on her resume, but on her cover letter. He wouldn't even call her in for an interview. So please keep that in mind about having spelling and grammatical errors. Spell check is not going to always catch them. So if you meant to say THERE, it may not, your computer may not indicate that it's a problem if you type in THEIR. So make sure you have someone look at it. Now I'm going to talk about that a little bit later as well. At this point in your lives, a one-page resume for entry-level internship and job applications. Until you've been out working several years, your resume should, at this point, be a one-page resume. Make sure that your spacing and margins are consistent throughout the resume so that it looks nice and it's glanceable. And minimum margins all around should be about 1/2 inch around the entire page. You want to use, easy to read fonts, something like a Times New Roman, Arial, something like that. And you want to use no more than 3 font sizes. So your headings could be one font size, your name could be a different, and maybe something else, but you don't want to have all these different font sizes throughout. It makes it tougher to read. You want your minimum font size to be 10 and the maximum to be 14. You don't want to go less than 10 because sometimes once again, it gets hard to read. The use of bolding and underlines, use that infrequently. You're only going to be using that in the case of whether where you want to organize your information visually to make it so that it's clear to read. And then all resume sections should be clearly labeled, and you're going to see that here when I give you that format. Within each section, list your jobs in reverse chronological order. What you want to do is list your most recent things first. It just lets the employer know what you're doing more recently, and so more recent and then going backwards. Personal pronouns, you don't use I, me, or we. mainly because you're using the next thing that I'm talking about here, and that's your bullet points instead of sentences. So when you send your resume in to an employer, hiring manager, they're going to know that it's about you. So it's not necessary for you to use pronouns like, saying it's I or me. And you definitely want your resume to be about you, not the team that you worked on. When you're going in for an interview, that's who they're going to want to know about. They're going to want to know about your accomplishments and what you did. And each bullet point should begin with a strong action verb or power word. And I'll be going over those a little bit later as well. Quantify your successes when possible. So for example, if you have volunteered someplace and you've worked with students, don't just say, well, I worked with students in the summer. They were 7th and 8th graders. You want to say, I worked with 20 students, or worked with 10, or worked with 2. It doesn't matter how many. It just matters that you quantify how many you've worked with so the employer can know what you're talking about. Where's your skill set lie? Have your resume proofread by at least one other person before sending it out. That's going back to what I was talking about before. You don't want to have any spelling or grammatical errors on your resume. Please have somebody else look at it. You've been looking at it so much, you may not see an error. It's just like when you're writing a paper for class, you've been looking at it so much that you might overlook something. Having someone else's eyes, fresh eyes on it might help you. And then the phrase references available upon request is not necessary. A long time ago, people used to put those on there. Recently here, they do not, because if an employer comes to you and asks you for references, of course you're going to supply that for them. So when you're looking at a resume, look at the white spaces going around it. Things here are centered at the top. You have your name, you have your address, how are they to contact you, and then you have your email address there. Now the jury is out on whether you should use an objective. So the one thing I will tell you is my own personal experience. When I was working as a recruiter, it was helpful to me if a student sent a resume in and had an objective, because I would know what they were looking for, especially if they sent in an unsolicited resume. So for example, if someone was working as a painter and they were painting houses in the summer, and then all of a sudden they jumped over and they were working in the marketing department, and then now they're working in finance. If it's an unsolicited resume, it was helpful to me to know, what are you looking for? Now, as time goes on, you'll do your research and you'll see that people say, instead of doing an objective, you do an executive summary. But that's after you've been in the workforce for a while. It's totally up to you. Some companies like objectives, some don't. I like them. It was helpful to me. For your education, you'll want to put what kind of degree you're going to have. If you haven't yet graduated, your expected graduation date, which college you're attending, what city and state that college is in, and then your major. Now the GPA, the thing that I would used to tell my students all the time was, anytime a GPA is a 3.0 and above, add it to your resume. If by chance your cumulative GPA is lower than your major GPA, then go with your major GPA, if you know that. So keep that in mind. If you've had any significant coursework, the reason why I put that on there is because if you are someone who has not had a lot of work experience, especially in your field, an employer could look at that and say, well, this person doesn't have a lot of work experience. However, they've had this kind of coursework. They could possibly bring that kind of knowledge from their coursework to this company. So that's why I always tell students, if you haven't had a lot of background in experience and work, then put it on your resume as significant coursework. And what I mean is courses that are within your major, not every single little thing that you've taken. Computer skills. People have asked me this in the past. They'll say, well, I don't want to put that I have Word and Excel and, you know, those types of things on there. And I tell them all the time the same thing. Yes, put that on there. If that's all you have, then yes, put that on there, include that. The reason why I say that is because if you have Word and Excel, I have had situations where I've looked at job descriptions and they will say, this person must be proficient in Excel. Well, if you have that on your resume, that's showing the employer that you have what they're looking for. If you have special skills, like you're fluent in another language, for example, in this case, I said fluent in Spanish, that could be helpful. What if the company has a branch in a Spanish-speaking country? Maybe someplace down the line, you could be considered full-time with that company and they would want you to spend some time in that country. So having that special skill there would let them know that, and they may ask you that. Related experience. So here you'll see I have what you did on one side and when you did it on the other side. This person said they've assisted with 2 major application implementation projects. They've resolved basic computer issues for 50 end users. So I put that in there to show how you can quantify what you've done. And that's a related experience because it has something to do with the person's major and their objective. Now, if you have other work experience, I've had a lot of conversation about this with students in the past. So other work experience, I say add it. This person was a sales associate, has nothing to do with them being an IT person. However, there is something called transferable skills. So if this person handled returns and exchanges in a customer service department, doesn't that speak to that person's ability to work with other people? Absolutely. And they're working with other people as an intern because they actually had to work with end users. When you're working in computer information systems, you may have to do that, work with other people. This person also worked with assisting with major store-wide inventory. So maybe they're very, very good with numbers, things like that. So there are a lot of transferable skills there and other situations that you can take from one experience to another. So keep that in mind as you're building your resume. Volunteer experience. Companies love to see students have volunteer experience. Why? Because companies are always giving to some cause. I worked at one company and they were real big with giving to United Way. I worked at another company, they were real big with working with American Red Cross. So people love to see that you're giving from the heart, and that's what volunteer experience is all about. They love to see your leadership experience. So if you've been elected vice president, that means that you had something that people saw in you that was great for that position and that was going to help them. This person in this situation ended up increasing the chapter enrollment by 15% for the academic year. So things like that are a big deal. If you are somebody that was in a leadership experience as a vice president and then moved up to a president, that's the kind of things that people want to see. And then the last thing, but not least, is your honors. Have you been on president's list? Have you been on the dean's list? Were you awarded a scholarship? Those are the types of things that employers like to see. It means that you're on your game as far as your academia. And once again, I went through each one of these, went through the objective, the education, and this was so that I could let you see this a little bit bigger if you couldn't see it before. Okay. Now, on to additional information. You want to be consistent. So if you have your resume out there on social media, for example, like LinkedIn, make sure that you mirror that with your resume that you're giving to employers. It's going to look a little weird and raise red flags if your resume that you're giving out to people doesn't match your social media profile. Once again, there's no need to have these phrases like responsible for, duties included, references available upon request. We know that when you use the bullet points that, you're going to be using those power words, so you don't need to use responsible for and duties included. No need to send the following with your resume, references and transcripts. If a company needs to have that information, they will ask for that when they need it. Now, as far as power words, I keep talking about these bullet points and power words. This is a list of some of the things that they are looking for. So what did you do? What did you achieve? What did you acquire? What did you balance? Like, did you balance the books? Did you chair something? Did you clarify things as you were in your position? So they're going to want to know, what are some of these things that you've done? And there's a list of several words that you can use. And these are the words that you use, once again, right after you have that bullet point there so that people can see what you've done. Okay. Earlier, I was talking about reading an article. I have tips for writing a great resume on my website, and you can go ahead and write that down or take a snapshot of that. btfstudentprogram.com. I invite you to go out there and read that article. Gives you basically the same information, but gives you a little bit more, especially if you are getting ready to apply for a position that's not in the country, and it gives you a little bit more resources. So you might want to take a look at that, and you can actually write a comment and tell me what you think. So that is basically the end of my presentation. So at this point, I'll give everything back to Miss Wendy. And Miss Wendy, if you'd like to let me know what questions are coming up, I'll take those at this time.
Well, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you very much for that. That was spot on advice. Thank you very much. Let's see, any questions? Does anyone have any questions regarding what Miss Yvette has shared today? Any questions? I'm looking at the chat function.
I'll go back to,
I think, go on.
I'll go back to the basic here in case people want to take another look at this up close as to how this looks.
I think sometimes students have questions as to what address to use because they are, in school, and then they also have their home address, etc. So I think that that's sometimes a question that comes up with students when they're creating their resume when they're still in college.
Right. Well, it depends on where you are. I've seen it set up. Sometimes students go back home for the summer. So I've seen one side, like their name would be at the top in the middle, and one side would have school address and the other side would have permanent address. So it kind of depends on where you are, where you're going to be able to get information from the employer if they need to do that. A lot of people these days do a lot of things electronically, but sometimes they do need to send information out. So it kind of depends on where you are. So if you are at school and you're going to be at school for a while, like it's at the beginning of the semester, then you can put your school address. And then if you're going to be home for the summer and you're getting ready to leave and you're still looking for that job, then yes, go ahead and put your permanent address there.
Wonderful, wonderful. So any other questions? Any other questions, anyone? Well, thank you very much, Yvette.